Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today for our final update on the listening process from independent research agency Savanta. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Leanne Kenny. I am the Member Engagement Lead here at Nominet, and I'm joined today by Megan Oliver and Harry King, along with some of the Nominet folk. And Megan and Harry are going to present to you guys the final report, or the findings really, from the listening process and the final report. So we have 90 minutes for this session. So they're going to present first, and then it is over to you guys to hear your questions. We are recording the session, and we will make that available on the Members Hub. If anybody wants details of how to get into the Member Hub, then the email address to get in touch with is engagement@nominet.uk. Okay, I am now going to hand over to Megan from Savanta. Megan, would you like to introduce yourself and kick us off?
Yeah, no, that sounds great. Thanks, Leanne. So good afternoon, everyone. For those that haven't seen my face before or haven't spoken to me, my name is Megan Oliver. I'm a director at Savanta and have overseen this process from day one, so have been involved throughout. So yeah, today I will take you through a little bit around the background and the methodology and just revisit those and recap those for anyone that isn't familiar with them. I'll then pass across to Harry, who many of you I'm sure will have spoken to at some point or received an email from at some point, and he'll take you through both a kind of high level view of the findings and what came out of the listening process, as well as a deep dive on some of those. And then I'll come back in at the end for conclusions. And then, as Leanne said, we've got lots of time at the end for a Q&A, so can answer any questions there for you. So just to kick things off, perfect, with background and methodology, we can move on to the next slide. Perfect. So yeah, I won't spend too long in this section, both either the background or the methodology, because I don't want to take away from the kind of meat that Harry is going to go through. But I think it is important that we just kind of recap what led us here, and also why we designed the approach that we did. So as everyone here is aware, Nominet plays a really critical role within the national digital infrastructure. And as part of that, it's accountable to members who you are all here today, as well as having responsibility towards a group of stakeholders as well. And those stakeholders representing domain solutions, cybersecurity, and public benefit work. And so those stakeholders comprise a lot of groups within those three strands. So as we say there, government, law enforcement agencies, public benefit partners, and civil society, as well as a group of experts. And then in the next slide, I've got a bit more detail on that as well. No, you don't have to go to it just yet. I'm just saying it's coming, because I know that is a question that we get. So again, as everyone here will know, earlier this year, there was a campaign group by members to remove 5 of Nominet's board, which passed. And as a consequence of that, Nominet wanted to really review kind of where things were at and really reset the relationship between itself and members, as well as stakeholders, to look at how the relationship could be more constructive moving forward. So as part of that, they reached out to us as an independent third party and as a research agency to undertake this listening process, and to therefore kind of really engage as a kind of neutral third party with different audiences to really understand origins of concerns, to listen to concerns, and look at what could be done to move the relationship forward and what would build trust moving forwards, and to feed this all back to Nominet. So if we go to the next slide, so that's the context. So again, just designing a research program to kind of address that was really essential, so that we could create a set of next steps that worked for members, stakeholders, and Nominet itself. So for us, the purpose of the research was really to listen to views, concerns, issues, feedback from all sides, to synthesize that, to look at where there was kind of real consensus in views across the different groups, where there was differences between groups or even within groups, and to feed that back to Nominet. So again, it was about kind of casting the net as wide as possible to hear from everyone and to create and set the tone for a more collaborative approach going forward. So as part of that, we spoke with 3 different audiences. And again, in the next few slides, I'll go into the detail of that. But again, just to recap, we spoke with members, kind of stakeholders, as well as employees for one of the elements as well. And I've already touched on kind of what we were looking to do for that. So just to kind of round this out in terms of our aims was, again, just to, reiterate here that our intention and the data from this is not to, look at these groups as in opposition to each other. It's really to look at where there's consensus, where there's differences, understand why those differences might exist, and to really just build this complete picture for Nominet on kind of what people's kind of current state of views were and what could be done moving forwards. So if we move on to the methodology, again, there's a lot of content here, so I won't go through it word by word and bore you all with that. But there's 2 elements here that I want to really call out before I go into the overview of what we actually did. And the first is this first paragraph here, which was about the approach that we took with the listening process. And for us at Savanta, it was really important that this process naturally was independent. That's our role, but also that it was really as transparent as possible and as inclusive as possible at every stage. And we really wanted and tried quite hard to speak to as wide a group of members as possible who had differing views of Nominet, differing relationships with Nominet. We really wanted to hear from everyone who wanted to say something to understand their experience and their views. So that's the kind of one element. And as said, the other element was to be as inclusive as possible and transparent as possible at every stage. So having those member webinars like today, but we've done them previously as well, to feedback throughout to members kind of what we were hearing, and giving members as well the chance to ask us questions around what we were finding. So that's the first element to highlight that was, really critical for us in our research design. The second element that I just wanted to touch upon, which I mentioned already, was kind of, I guess, the 4th paragraph down there around the stakeholder groups, because I am aware that that's a question that's been posed to us previously around what stakeholders took part in this process or in the listening process overall. And while we can't reveal individual names in line with the MRS Code of Conduct, we have listed out here the groups that we, the different kind of groups that we spoke with as part of this. So again, I just want to touch on that quickly. So we spoke with special interest groups. So for example, business groups or industry peers. We spoke with other kind of intranet focused organizations or committees. So for example, other registries. We also spoke with different people within UK government or different departments within UK government. We spoke with registry services customers as well as DRS experts as well. So again, just to kind of be as transparent as possible at front around who those stakeholders are that we spoke to. And then finally, as I said, we also spoke with employees as well. So yeah, just to highlight those in terms of the methodology for you. But if we move on to the next slide, I'll get into the actual what we did. So I've got this slide, which is an overview, and then the next few slides detail a little bit more the base sizes and the numbers of people we spoke to. So I'll get to that in a moment. But again, just to recap what we did and kind of why we did it the way we did it. So we had the listening process kickoff with Nominet to hear from them around the kind of context and the different audiences. We then went into the immersion phase, which was the straw poll and focus groups, and just to really build that foundation for the rest of the project, to make sure as well that the consultation was relevant, that we weren't putting things in there that were completely irrelevant, but also that we were putting questions in there that people felt that were needed to be asked. So again, just building that knowledge for us of the issues across members and stakeholders and making sure that the consultation was fit for purpose. So following that immersion phase, we had the first of our member webinars, which hopefully some of you here attended. We then moved into that consultation phase, which was quite chunky and open for a few weeks there, which again, members could, and stakeholders and employees could answer kind of as much or as little as they wanted to. But again, giving them that opportunity to answer what they wanted to and to say things that they felt that they needed to share. We then did a member webinar again after that. And then finally, we had the series of deep dive interviews, which was a much smaller kind of qualitative phase where we spoke to specific groups to kind of answer any questions that arose from the consultation, dig into the detail a bit, and again, just make sure that we were covering off everything that we needed to in terms of member and stakeholder feedback. And then we pulled together the final report and this final member webinar today. So if we just go into the next slide, I'll touch upon again, just a little bit of detail. And sorry, I should have said as well in that previous slide, in terms of everyone who participated throughout every phase at a total level. So I'll run through what people did at each phase, but the total number of members that participated in the listening process is 265. And then we spoke to 58 stakeholders throughout the different phases, as well as 163 employees, just to give you a sense of those overall base sizes. So again, just the immersion phase to touch upon quickly. We did that straw poll, which you might have remembered from April time, if you can remember that far back. I can't, but so we spoke with 240 members as part of that really quick little poll. And then we did some focus groups with members and then interviews with members who couldn't participate in a focus group, as well as a few stakeholders there. So again, that was kind of April, May time, and just that initial kind of deep dive. If we then move on to the consultation itself, perfect. So for the consultation, again, this was open for several weeks to make sure that members, stakeholders, and employees had enough time to respond to it as they wanted to. And we spoke with 185 members there, 54 stakeholders, and then 163 employees. So that took place from June to July. And then just a quick note on the members we spoke to in that base size there, again, recognizing this is a question that we've had in the past from different members. And just to frame, I guess, the findings more broadly is what we'd say is that's a really robust base size. And that's actually, we do undertake a lot of kind of membership work and stakeholder work. And that's actually quite a good response rate from this type of work. So we're quite confident in that base size, but we also recognize the size of the membership universe is much bigger than that. And that's a little under, I think around 10%-ish of Nominet's membership size. So while it's robust, we can't say that it's representative of all member views, and we're conscious of that. So in the report and in the presentation today, we'll say things like members said X, or we might say members feel Y. We recognize that that's not representative of all members, and not all members feel that way, but just again, to note for the sake of brevity in the report, and today we've just said members say or members feel, as opposed to all members who responded said X, or all members who responded feel Y. But we do recognize that this can't be said to be representative of all members. So just a note on that. And then finally, just to comment on the deep dive. Perfect. So yeah, these were 30 interviews with members and stakeholders. So we spoke with 10 members who participated in the consultation. So we're familiar with the consultation, had already responded and said that they were open to being recontacted. Again, with the aim of speaking to as broad a range of members as possible. We also spoke to 10 members who hadn't participated in the consultation to hear their views and make sure that we were getting them to weigh in on specific areas. And then finally, as well, we spoke with 10 stakeholders, and that took place in mid-August to kind of early September. And we've started reporting since then. So again, I appreciate that's in some ways a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the methodology. And absolutely, if you have any questions on it, please do, put that into the chat, or we can discuss at the end. But I didn't want to go into too much detail at this stage, so that I can pass across to Harry to kind of go through the hopefully more interesting elements of the findings. So Harry, I'll pass across to you.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Megan. Yeah, if we just skip to the next slide, Fab. So just what I'm going to do first is run through what we've come out as the summary of the kind of overall story from all of the conversations and all of the phases of the research. And then I'm going to go into more detail on what we have as 6 of the kind of key topic areas. So first of all, to just run through that, as we've called it, a listening process at a glance. We found that the disagreement that led to the EGM vote earlier in the year came from negative perceptions among members, particularly around the board ignoring members' interests, taking the organisation in what they thought was obviously the wrong direction. And we found that these feelings had sort of built up over time as Nominet's role had evolved. And obviously, like I say, some members thought that it evolved in a way they weren't happy with. Some of those that we spoke to can understand why Nominet's role has evolved over the years and kind of commented that, as an organisation in Nominet's position with that kind of overview and role in the critical national infrastructure, it does have a responsibility to use that oversight to contribute toward public good and to have some sort of involvement in cybersecurity activities. However, also what we found from our research is there is a significant subset of the members we spoke to who have strong views that Nominet should act as a registry only, and that some of these other activities sort of shouldn't be part of Nominet's remit. And actually, some felt that these activities were being pursued not in members' interests, but actually in sort of the Nominet executives' interests. And in their view, Nominet should run a more lean operation with less of a focus on generating profit. And I think one of the important findings, as we'll come on to detail more, and you'll see in the full report, is that there is really a perception that the reasons behind some of Nominet's changes haven't really, I suppose, been communicated as clearly, and so that kind of wider strategy not been communicated as clearly as many members and also stakeholders would have liked. And I think the important elements of that are, justification behind why decisions are made, transparency over where profits and funds are sort of generated from and where they go. And then we'll see that kind of key point of the lack of member involvement in major decisions that some members have fed back to us. And I think this has led to a view among some members that Nominet is sort of intentionally keeping back some information that they perceive should be open and available. I think just the final kind of key point here, this kind of summary, is that both members and stakeholders agree that addressing the issue of trust is going to be the key element to creating a more constructive relationship and to make that relationship work for everybody, and also obviously to preserve the actual stability of the organisation going forward. And I think there was a lot of consensus in some of the ways that people felt that could be achieved in terms of building transparency right into the kind of the fabric of the membership structure, allowing a regular two-way dialogue between Nominet members and not just the organisation, but also some of the more kind of senior areas of the Nominet as an organisation, allowing member input kind of at all times when it's kind of appropriate, and then also that key point again of justifying decisions that impact members and stakeholders to them in that kind of open and transparent way. Thanks. We could just move to the next slide. And then what I'm going to do now is go through, I've called it 6 different key areas. And for each of these slides, we've basically condensed it into a slide summary, which also is on the report. And then in the full report, behind each of these 6 slides, which I'm going to go through, is a host of other slides with or pages of the report with all of the analysis, charts, quotes, all of the detail really. So obviously this is hopefully a summary of the section, but is not all of the information that is contained within that. And the first of our sections is titled Trust in Nominet. So we basically found that trust was a major issue impacting perceptions of Nominet among some members. There's a quote there that kind of represents that. And basically one of the key findings, I think, from the listening process was that there has been an erosion of trust in Nominet among some members over recent years. And the key to ensuring that the relationship going forward can be kind of constructive, mutually beneficial, will be to kind of address that and start to rebuild some of that trust. And I think an important distinction that came through actually from quite early on in our study was that we got the feedback that there is a high level of trust in Nominet to carry out some of the responsibilities, some of the sort of technical aspects, operational elements of running the domain name registry from all audiences, obviously not every single person, and that the loss of trust tends to be in regards to Nominet not taking into account members' views in decision-making, the transparency of decision-making, and the sort of direction, as I said, of some of the decisions that have been made, and then the way that that's been communicated. And that has in turn led to the perceived lack of transparency and the loss of trust. And another important point to mention is that trust is obviously very nuanced term. It means various things to different people, as we found early on when people told us that we would probably been maybe we needed to explain that term trust more. So we asked members in the consultation and stakeholders and employees, what does that term mean to you? And got a lot of different responses. And I think essentially many members feel that the important thing is restoring the trust in the board needs to be the starting point to then build trust in other areas and other activities. And that can kind of come once that trust in the board has started to rebuild. If you could skip to the next slide. So the second of our sections is communications and effective collaboration. And the kind of headline from our findings there is that a regular, open and honest communication will help to foster a more collaborative relationship between all parties, members, stakeholders, and Nominet as an organisation. And again, there's a slight nuance there that we found that comments about the day-to-day member engagement and certain individuals was deemed to be positive, and the sort of, again, on more the technical side and the member relationship side, there were certainly positives. However, there was a consensus across stakeholders, employees, and members that some of the communication on the wider strategy over the years has been quite poor. And members comment that the decisions, historically haven't been communicated openly and regularly enough, and this has potentially led to that lack of transparency. I think there was a broad consensus that a move to a relationship where there is more regular, open dialogue would help to build respect from both sides and essentially create a bit of a culture change where Nominet is open by default and not have that kind of closeness or secrecy that some members perceive. And many people, including both members and stakeholders, feel that this would then in turn lead to improved transparency. Again, that kind of more two-way, I think, is kind of a key phrase that we've kept hearing a lot, relationship, and that ultimately we'd help to kind of generate more buy-in and support for some of the other responsibilities when the conversation is there for all of these different elements. And I think the important part of that is that it's that genuine desire to listen to members and stakeholders, allow input and allow communications, and having that avenue where Nominet is informing and justifying and explaining decisions, but also members have an opportunity to feedback and know that they're being listened to and not just kind of giving views which aren't then being received, acknowledged, and have a response. And getting to that point where that is the kind of default situation where members feel like they have a voice that is being at least listened to, even if not every decision is going to be in line with what their views are. That will kind of help as a good building block to building some trust. If you can move to the next slide, please. Fantastic. So our third section is, I've just written down the titles because I've realized they're not on the slides, is Nominet's Remit and Strategy. And again, our kind of headline finding there is that generally all audiences we spoke to, the three key audiences, believe that Nominet's principal role should be running the UK domain registry. However, while there was kind of that consensus that managing a stable, secure, transparent registry should be the primary focus and be absolutely what Nominet is committed to doing, there was less consensus among the different audiences, and indeed within some of those three audiences, as to exactly what role Nominet should play beyond this and where that should sort of stretch. I think, kind of over time, Nominet's role has developed to include many different elements, and the sort of key ones being, that protective DNS for UK government, some of the kind of charitable kind of foundations, and kind of other diversification. And I think while some of the people we spoke to comment that it is right and logical that this should be the case and that Nominet should be adopting these, using their oversight, as I've said, of the kind of UK domain space to do that, there were others that we spoke to who believe that Nominet should run a more lean operation that focuses solely on running the registry. And that's absolutely some of the feedback that we heard and fed back. Broadly, both members and stakeholders commented that, whatever the future direction is in that role and remit, something which would be important again to that transparency and trust is to outline a clear plan for the purpose, for Nominet to come up with a idea of their scope and remit, and then to communicate this really clearly so that the various responsibilities are kind of understood, and then obviously keep to this going forward. So again, it's that kind of accountability and just making sure that all of the membership and all of the kind of stakeholder universe are aware of what Nominet's remit is, so kind of avoids any confusion there. Next slide, please. So yeah, our fourth section is governance and the use of reserves. And again, this is one I think where it was a really key part. Those of you who take part in the research would have remember, it was, I think, a key part of our research because we knew it was a key issue on various kind of strains of governance. And we found that ultimately there was limited consensus with regards to any structural governance changes that people wanted. I think one of the key areas of particularly the consultation, however, whilst there were lots and lots of different suggestions that members, stakeholders and employees put forward, raising concerns with regards to the governance, there wasn't really a consensus from a significant majority on this is absolutely, we can go back into Nominet and say everybody wants this change to be made. What we've done in the report is, which I think is important, to outline all of the different suggestions that were given, and there are quotes in there as well, just to kind of demonstrate, okay, these are all some of the suggestions. So that ranges from changing voting rights to be more in favour of smaller members, more involvement from actual members on the Nominet board, more of a role for members to decide who's on the Nominet board, actually changing some of the specific kind of board composition. As I said, yeah, none of these received kind of support from a significant majority to the extent that we could then give that as a sort of a clear recommendation. And some of the most common concerns, I think, from both members and stakeholders with regards to governance was that the current sort of structure of Nominet as an organisation is not as stable as they potentially thought previously. And obviously the kind of the disagreement that led to the EGM is an example they cited. And with that in mind, I think a really important point is that any structural changes or any governance changes should really have the primary aim, first and foremost, of shoring up stability to ultimately protect the UK registry and to protect members' interests as obviously members of the organisation. Fantastic. Next slide, please. So yeah, our penultimate section was titled Social Impact Programmes, so all around the kind of the charitable work and funding that Nominet does. So we found in this kind of area that the programs which focus on technology and on young people were seen as the most positive way for Nominet to contribute towards society. When we asked about some of the different charitable programs that Nominet has funded, we found that of those who are aware of them, of the different kind of programs, there was a high level of satisfaction in those, and in particular, the kind of two ones which had the highest level of support were Countering Online Harm Tech Innovation Fund and Accelerated Mobile Capacity for Samaritans. So these kind of projects were again the ones that, when we conducted our follow-up interviews, received most kind of level of support. And again, as I said, I think there's a view that if Nominet are to fund social impact programs as part of these wider responsibilities and the contribution that they should be making to the UK public, doing it through programs which are relevant to the organisation and demonstrate where Nominet is able to have a really positive impact, and then specifically within that, those that relate to technology and young people are seen as probably the best ways to do that. And if, again, that's probably these are the best kind of programs that people think Nominet should be contributing. And then, as well as that, it's again the transparency, the openness, justifying decisions, why we think this is the best use of funds is another important element. And I think another important element for us to raise is that, as we've discussed, there is that portion of the members that we spoke to who would prefer that Nominet actually don't fund these programs and they limit their remit to just running the registry. And for them, that is the core role remit, and anything outside that is not something that they would support. In terms of, again, that communication, so as I've said, around the transparency and that openness of the communication, there were some who commented that in the past, some of these charitable activities could have been communicated more effectively. So justification of decisions, and also the representation of figures is something which people raised the criticisms with, and again, more detail of that in the full report. Fantastic. If you could just move to the next slide. So our final main section of the report in terms of the findings is on commercial investments. And we essentially found that Nominet's approach to diversification has been frustrating to some members and stakeholders, and they're going forward an open and focused approach, which it sounds maybe a bit contradictory there, but I hope I'll explain it well enough. So open in terms of kind of that transparency, being open in their manner of going about diversification, and focused in terms of it being related to projects that people believe are relevant for Nominet. So many raised concerns over how Nominet's attitude to commercial investments and diversification has changed over the years, and they felt that initially the kind of the remit of Nominet being that the commercial investments or any diversification would be there with the purpose of benefiting members and the public, to what they view as a more commercial focus, where the aims are to increase growth and to increase executive remuneration. So that's the kind of the view that some of the people we spoke to fed back to us. And I think one challenge and one of the more clear differences between subsets of our overall audience with that some of the members we spoke to and some of the stakeholders we spoke to have a belief that domain name prices and revenue are kind of stable and will remain stable, and therefore they don't see really a need for the diversification, which then calls into question for them all of the kind of commercial investment decisions. However, there are others we spoke to, both members and stakeholders, who actually say they expect domain name revenue to decrease over time as it kind of becomes devalued, meaning that Nominet would need to secure alternative funding to be able to manage the registry and also fulfill some of the other obligations that are now part of Nominet's role. I think, however, the disagreements are, there was a consensus that Nominet should diversify enough, though, of course, from all the different groups we spoke to, where that boundary actually lies is going to be very different. There's a kind of wide spectrum there. But ultimately, if Nominet did, to improve perceptions on commercial investments, Nominet should be communicating the justification, again, transparency and openness over kind of why we believe this is the best use of money, why we are intending to generate profit. And where appropriate, or generate funds. And again, where appropriate, establishing a clear strategy in this area would be, again, valuable, just so that Nominet members can understand what are the aims of these commercial investments, and ultimately, how is it going to impact them? So that's the last of our main sections. And again, it's fairly whistle stop, but hopefully you'll see in the full report that all of these points are built out and the picture's a bit more full. But for now, I'll pass back to Megan, who's going to run through some of our overall conclusions from across the research.
Perfect. Thanks, Harry. Yeah, excellent. So if we just move on to the conclusions, and they should hopefully just feel like a summary of everything that Harry's just said and the kind of next steps and so what. So if we just move to the next slide, the first conclusions here, so they kind of broadly fall under trust, remit, and governance. So just focusing on trust, which is naturally a key theme throughout. And how many times can we say the word transparency in a presentation? But it will continue. It really is the most critical issue that was impacting trust. And the feedback that we had from members and stakeholders is to really to focus on rebuilding trust, and that's really critical. And that transparency in decision making is what's going to help create and help rebuild this trust. So as I said, kind of transparency around decision making, allocation of funds, and why is going to be one of the really key steps to rebuild trust. Second is establish and communicate a clear strategy. So again, this was across members and stakeholders wanting to see Nominet both kind of develop but also explain the strategy for use of profits. So again, bringing together this view on kind of transparency and communication and kind of strategic direction and the allocation of funds, bringing that all together so that they're really communicating that strategy. again, to bring people on that journey, kind of recognizing that there are some who think that Nominet shouldn't be doing, shouldn't kind of be in the, making profit and having social impact programs and kind of explaining that. But a really key element of this as well in kind of communicating the strategy is hopefully to avoid or reduce kind of suspicion around motive and any kind of concerns that information is being kind of withheld or hidden. And then third, around trust, is this piece around the regular two-way dialogue that Harry talked about a few minutes ago. Again, from both members and stakeholders, this view that a regular open dialogue would benefit both, that it's important that members have the opportunity to communicate with the Nominet executive, that they have the opportunity to share their views, what they want from the direction of the organization, and that will help them trust kind of that they're being listened to and trust decision making, but also that Nominet aren't just going off and making decisions, not communicating with them, that they've got this dialogue themselves with members as well, so that they're starting to be a bit more of a direct and kind of communication channel, but also really building a real relationship. So again, it's, I say there, it's not just about keeping members informed, but also about members kind of weighing in where it's possible and where it's appropriate to know that they're being listened to. So that's trust. If we move on to Remit and the kind of 3 points here. So again, just reiterating kind of what is the Remit, what do members and stakeholders see as the Remit for Nominet. Absolutely agreement that the registry function is critical. It should be its main, its primary focus. That is core to what Nominet is and does, and it needs to remain that way. Beyond that, though, there was perhaps a bit less consensus around the amount that Remit should stretch. But, again, the feedback we heard was that, if it is stretched, it has to be done in a way that makes sense, that's related to the areas that Nominet already works within, and that is, if Nominet is going to go beyond that primary focus, that it needs to be relevant. And again, just a point there that there was more support for Nominet's work, particularly for UK government, as opposed to private sector investment and that role in terms of contributing to the UK public benefit. Second here, again, around transparency. And particularly as it relates to the social impact programs. So again, for those who were familiar with Nominet's work in this area, they were, kind of broadly satisfied with Nominet having a philanthropic role in some form. But again, this piece around both transparency, but also financial transparency within social impact programs and kind of clearly communicating what they're doing, why, and what that spend is. There was some kind of, again, comments from members around the motivation of participation in programs. So is it just for generating positive press? So again, by kind of clearly communicating, what they're doing and why, will hopefully help combat some of those kind of suspicions, I guess, that it's kind of the intention is purely just for good PR. And then finally, again, just addressing this piece around concern around Nominet being too commercially focused and kind of its commercial investments. So absolutely, there's, we recognize there's been discontent over Nominet's attitude and approach to commercial investments more recently. And that, again, this kind of lack of transparency or lack of understanding of what's being done and why has created this sense that Nominet, by some members, that Nominet is too commercially focused, and that's actually not giving, it's not really clear what that benefit is for members. So again, just opening up these lines of communication kind of before or after to allow members to have that input on conversations around diversification. Again, building this two-way relationship should hopefully allow Nominet to explain, why they think diversification is needed, and members to kind of understand or challenge and just have those kind of open conversations around what diversification can or should happen. And then finally, just to close out here on governance, we move to the next slide. Perfect, thank you. So just two final points. around governance. And the first one is, again, as Harry touched upon, is that there isn't really clear preference for any specific governance changes. There's quite a wide variety of views between the different groups, but within groups as well. It wasn't that members felt one thing, stakeholders felt another. There was actually quite a diversity of opinion within groups. So there wasn't necessarily a kind of clear recommendation of change, but really the one thing that did kind of ring through this kind of conversations around governance from the consultation and the interviews was again this kind of potential concern around if some of these views aren't addressed, the kind of disruption, ongoing disruption could impact the stability of Nominet itself, and that given its critical role in infrastructure, that it's important that that the governance ensures that there's stability within the operating functions of Nominet, and that's really critical. That kind of continues on, whether governance changes are enacted or not, that stability is put kind of at the forefront, which kind of dovetails nicely with that final point there, which is just that any change needs to prioritize trust and stability. And that absolutely, as I said at the outset of the conclusion section, that trust and transparency are key, and the foundations of trust, rebuilding those foundations is absolutely the kind of immediate priority, and that can be done through transparency. And by doing that, again, is really about building that stability and creating a path forward. And that's really, I think the final point to end on is that for both members and stakeholders, there is a clear desire that there is a path forward, and that there can be a positive outcome for everyone. And that's really what people communicated to us as wanting as a result moving forwards. So we'll end it there as a kind of whistle-stop tour of the findings from the listening process. And absolutely, we've got a good amount of time now to answer any questions you have, and recognize that the full report and data is going to be released very shortly, I believe, after this, I think. So yeah, so absolutely here to answer any questions that you have.
Perfect. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Harry. Lots of content to get through there. And I'm sure you guys have got lots of questions for Megan and Harry. So who would like to start us off? Andrew, I think you had a question that you submitted.
I can't remember the one I submitted, but I'll ask another one.
Okay.
on the subject of transparency, there's a heavy reliance on the stakeholders in this consultation listening exercise. Who were the is it 53 stakeholders? Will the report identify who they were, because they seem to have a much bigger weighting than the members themselves? And looking at your figure, that's it. Yeah.
Okay, Megan, do you want to take that point in terms of methodology and whether there was any weighting applied? And also, I think, didn't you mention something about Research Society Code of Conduct not enabling you to actually name them individually?
Yeah, so I'll kind of answer some of those in reverse order. So yeah, absolutely. As as I mentioned at the outset, in line with the Market Research Society Code of Conduct, we can't name individuals. That's just in line with best practice in research, just as we wouldn't necessarily name employees or members that we spoke with to give them the opportunity to remain anonymous. But again, have tried to give you as clear a distinction as possible around who those groups are, so that you can understand who we spoke with without being able to kind of go and immediately identify who those people are. I think, I guess just going to your first point, I'm curious why it seems that it's more weighted towards stakeholders, or what's kind of given you that impression. Would be useful to understand a bit more why that's kind of come across.
I was just looking at the numbers on your slide. So you've got members 185, staff 163, stakeholders 54. So there's far more other stakeholders and staff that have replied to your methodology or survey than the members, and from the outset we sort of started out as a listening exercise for members to find out what's gone wrong with the EGM, and then we halfway through the exercise we switched to this methodology that you ask every member of staff, and to get 163 staff to answer the survey in the first place is quite remarkable. They must have had a 3-line whip out at Nominet to answer that. I just wondered why the same approach wasn't applied to the membership to try and get 2,000 members to answer the survey.
Yeah, well, we would have loved 2,000 members to respond, absolutely. And we did go out to every single member that we could engage in the process. So for any that had kind of do not contact, we can't go to them and contact them. But if they did contact us and said that they actually did want to participate, then we did add them to the mail out. So we did go out to every member that we could, and we sent multiple reminders as well to people and tried to publicize it as much as possible. So absolutely would have loved to have more members take part. So it's really a reflection of I guess some of the kind of engagement of different groups, and some immediately wanted to respond and others didn't. So it's certainly not that that some groups were overly targeted over others. And we do take the kind of balanced approach quite seriously in terms of sending an equal amount of reminders, etc. But unfortunately, we can't control the total number of people that respond as much as I would like to. And I think I guess just to touch on that first point you mentioned there in terms of who we engaged, and from our perspective, this listening exercise, as I mentioned at the outset, was to cast as wide a net as possible and recognize that different groups engage with Nominet in different ways, including employees, and they have a lot of interesting insight to share, and really to look at consensus. And I would hope that what this shows is that actually in some of the key member concerns around transparency, there was consensus, and that was echoed by stakeholders, and that was echoed by employees. And I think that brings a kind of really well-rounded picture to some of the issues that were there. But we always wanted to speak with different groups that engaged and recognize that people engage in different ways.
Okay,
thanks, Megan.
Thank you. Thanks.
Just a point, as an employee, there was no 3-line whip to respond to that consultation. Simon, your hand up is next. Let's come to you. Oh, hang on, can't hear you.
How's that?
Yep, can hear you now.
Good afternoon, thank you. I just to follow on from Andrew's points there, it is an interesting thing that there's effectively more employees and stakeholders than member responses in what was meant to be a membership listening exercise. And I suspect perhaps why you got low engagement was because 1,300 people had already turned out to vote and give quite a large feedback in the form of the EGM. So probably they felt like they'd already just made their point. I think the campaign was quite clear on what the problems were. The report that you've just published doesn't really add much additional context to what was being said quite loudly and clearly in the EGM. And I think members probably considered that A, they'd already said their bit, and B, Nominet has had a history of rolling out a deep listening exercise as an excuse to kettle views, shape them, and then ignore them. So it ties back into trust again, but here was another exercise that cynically people had a legitimate and historical reason to distrust, and so they felt like they couldn't be bothered to engage. I guess there's not really much more I can add to that, but that might explain the low turnout.
Okay, thanks, Simon. Cyprian, does anybody want to come back on that point? Actually,
was there particularly a question?
No, I think it was more a comment. Yeah.
Okay.
But if there's any members as well who'd want to come back on that point, you can raise your hand and I will come to you. No? Okay, let's move on to Cyprian. Cyprian, have you got a question?
Yeah, hi everyone. So on the same point of the categories of stakeholders, membership, and employees, in the final report, will we have a clear segregation of these so that we can draw a conclusion based on the categories of interest to us?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really important. And I think, I hope that when you read the final report, you actually won't get the impression that it's heavily weighted. And certainly, I don't know if you agree, Megan, I found writing and reading it that we were weighting it more in favor, not weighting it, but it was member first and member comments, and obviously the observations from the other groups to supplement that. And yeah, absolutely. In the full report, it's all split. I think everything is split by the 3 subgroups because obviously that's the kind of the data on total level doesn't really make any sense, and that it definitely would be weighted in favor of employees. So yeah, everything is shown by the 3, so you can see the context and where relevant, we've called out, differences within members and within stakeholders, etc.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
I'm going to come to Matthew. Simon, you've still got your hand up, so I will come back to you. I will not come back to you until you have another question. You will have to re-raise your hand. Matthew, I'll come to you.
Thanks very much. Just a quick question about just going on from the members, the stakeholders and the staff. It was said that the member response was about just under 10%, which was probably what one would expect for an organisation of Nominet's size. What were the percentages, the response percentages for the stakeholders and the staff, just out of interest?
That is a good question. Let me have a look at the data.
While Harry's finding that, I'll just add a little note from a membership engagement perspective. We usually do carry out an annual membership survey every year, and just under 10% is about the same response rate that we would get to that annual survey as well. Obviously, we haven't done it this year because we've had this huge listening process going on, and obviously, to Simon's point, we don't want to keep asking members to do things that they feel like they might have already given us their views on, but it's roughly just under 10%. Harry?
Yeah. Can I continue to just do the calculations now and maybe field another question? And I promise you I'll find the response to that.
No worries.
Very shortly.
Well, we might be making you sweat here because nobody's got their hand up.
Okay, so, no, that won't take me.
Otherwise, we're all just going to sit here and stare at you. Simon saved you.
I'll just. It looks to me like the actual membership response is closer to 7.5% than 10, and my best estimate at employees would be about 62%. But let's see if that comes in here. I feel like it's a bit of a game show now. We're just sort of waiting to see what the actual final numbers are. But that's a good question, Matthew.
But I think that depends on whether you count it as members as a whole, or whether you count it as the members who were able to receive the survey.
Yeah, I think we had.
They're not the same number. So yeah, we can only communicate with members who are signed up for updates. We have a very large number of members who are not registered to receive updates on membership engagement stuff, and it's an issue. About 1,000.
Out of, remind me, help.
2,400.
Okay, that's a decent chunk. And
yeah.
For example, do those members get in the post the annual report and things like that, or do they not even get that?
Only if they've requested it to be in hard copy. So complicated email preference thing, which I'm happy to talk to you about offline, Matthew. But in terms of member engagement, well, thanks. I'd try to make it interesting.
No, but it's yes.
But
it's one of those things, but yeah.
In terms of member engagement, the number of members who actually want to receive this kind of information, I'll flip it. The number of members who are not interested in receiving this kind of information is a significant number. And, we do keep trying to chip away at it, but it is quite a significant number. Harry.
Yeah, I've got it. And yeah, I think Simon, it was Simon who gave the guess right, very close. So of the employees we spoke to, we had 60% completion rate. So 273 received the opportunity to participate, and 163 did participate. And then stakeholders, we mailed out to 151 and obviously got 54 completes in the consultation. And then there were some stakeholders who didn't take part in the survey, but did take part in the interviews, bringing that up to 58 total stakeholders who engaged. So yeah, we mailed out to 151.
Thanks, Harry. Simon, back to you.
Yeah, sorry to be asking so many questions. So about 1,000 members of the 2,400 members opt out for contact, and you can't come to them and say, hey, what do you think about this stuff? Were those members rung by the old board and told to vote? Or were their contact preferences for not being contacted honoured?
Well, it's only email preferences.
Right.
So you have to opt in to, you have specific email preferences in your online services account. And it applies to email only.
Understood. But that would also explain the discrepancy then, wouldn't it? Because if Nominet were ringing people and saying, please vote no, this EGM is important, vote no, and that was overriding their email preferences, that would also explain why you had more people vote at the EGM than you had in the listening exercise. It's not.
Well, we didn't phone people and tell them how to vote.
Oh, okay. That's
in the calls that we made, we didn't tell people how to vote.
Okay, that might be the case for Nominet staff and employees, but that's not what I've heard for other members of the board. But okay, that was just a point there, that if you were able to ring people for the EGM vote, then you would have been able to ring people for the listening exercise.
Just on that, I believe there was some efforts to increase the increase the number of members who were eligible for the emails by ringing around some people. So the idea being as many people who wanted to take part in a consultation were able to have the opportunity to do so. And also from a participation in the consultation point of view, which obviously I can comment on, is I think it was publicised by Nominet, and then people then had the opportunity to get in touch with me, with Savanta, and we would then add them to the database. So a handful of people did do it through that way as well. So some people who weren't on the email preference list would have been able to take part if they got in touch.
We did do that.
Again,
okay.
We did do a ring round actually of people who were not subscribed to receive member updates. Mm-hmm. But it's a lot of members. We didn't get through to everybody. Another issue is member data.
Yeah. Just for what it's worth, I don't think I was asked to have a sort of, I wasn't spoken to at the consultation phase or for an interview, which I would have probably been happy to do, and it might have been logical. But yeah, you take my point though, Leanne. Like, if members were rung to vote at the EGM and we saw 1,300 members turning up to vote, clearly your efforts there reached a lot of members. It would be interesting to see how many calls as a ratio were made to get people to answer the listening exercise, but perhaps it's.
I think we managed to get through to about 400. So the point of the call was to say you are not currently subscribed to receive member updates, so you miss out on X, Y, and Z. Oh, and by the way, there is also currently a listening process, and you won't have received the invitation to participate in the survey. Would you like us to update it? But there's only so many of us,
yes,
and we can't force people. We can't force members to opt into something that they don't.
No, of course not.
Take part in.
And it has been a very very busy period for you all, and
it certainly has.
And for that, I would like to apologise for my role in that. But I'm hoping that Nominet will come out the other side of it stronger. But nonetheless, apologies for all of the additional work that was encountered this year that wasn't anticipated.
Okay. Tom's put okay, getting distracted by the chat. Okay, Andrew's got his hand up. Let's go to Andrew.
So this is a question about the conclusions and the governance changes on the slide 3 of the conclusions. When we talk about governance changes, what are we actually talking about in terms of, are we talking about the voting rights being changed, or the elected NEDs on the board, or are we talking about a completely different company being set up? And just in one example, it says it on your slide, some stakeholders raise concerns that any continued disruption will ultimately endanger the stability of the registry. When we talk about the stakeholders there, we're not talking about members, I presume. We're talking about government stakeholders. So are the governance changes amongst the different groups that you surveyed different depending which category they come from?
Okay, Harry, I think there's about 3 different questions in there.
I would say in terms of the question on what do we mean by governance changes, it's more the former that you said there. So kind of, yeah, board composition, voting rights, not setting up kind of a whole new company. And then in terms of the question on, some stakeholders raised concerns about the stability. That is something that was raised predominantly by stakeholders, but there were members we spoke to who said essentially the point being, I worry, not me, one worries that I previously thought that Nominet was just a stable registry, so me as a stakeholder, as a member, didn't really have to worry. They were always going to be there and doing the job, running the registry for me. This whole process has made me a bit worried that actually structurally it's not as sound as I thought. So for them, the important thing is that the governance structure of Nominet allows allows that to be kind of stable, and then to have trust that it's going to continue. But as I said, there was no kind of consensus or really suggestions on a wholesale change that anybody wanted. It was more just kind of reaffirming that stability is important to them. Yeah, and certainly weren't implying that there should be any wholesale structural changes to that would be a more stable version of Nominet than currently exists.
And Andrew, does that answer your question with regards to who had the concerns about stability?
So yeah, I'd say
it's just interesting. You just identify that point. You could say that members think the Constitution works fairly well, that they're able to vote people out with a 3% cap. So that wasn't highlighted. That
wasn't something we specifically received as feedback. So hard to we've tried essentially to feedback everything, and obviously we heard an awful lot in all 3 phases, but tried to basically feedback so everything is represented in our essentially what is our feedback to Nominet. So yeah, any kind of points that were raised were included.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we've got loads of time. Use it while you have it. Who else has got another question? Anything in the? There's nothing in the chat. Simon, your sound's gone again.
Thanks. Sorry. Harry, did anybody in the sort of answering the questions or expressing concerns about stability, did they explain where their concerns about stability had come from?
So yeah, except from the kind of conversations I've had of interviews, I'm just trying to kind of wrap my brains. It's more the seeing that something like the EGM vote, it is possible when and potentially has could have a destabilizing effect on Nominet. That is more of a concern for them. It's not a specific not so much of a specific point. It's just generally, it's made them rethink their kind of views on Nominet. So for them, therefore, it's really important that they're kind of reassured that Nominet is a kind of a stable organization. And then all of the suggestions which they gave in terms of increased transparency, the word I've said a million times, building trust, is that for them the most important aspect of achieving that.
Right. I see Andy's hand's gone up, and I don't want to keep him waiting, but it strikes me that it's kind of the other way round would have been the logical conclusion. The EGM is good governance in effect. It's the stakeholders taking an active interest in the management of the business, and that's checks and balances. Inherently, in itself, it's not destabilizing. Arguably, the previous direction of the board was destabilizing. And so I was trying to think, is there actually a correlation between a lot of people saying, I'm worried about the future stability of the company, because that's exactly what the old board was saying. They were beating the drum and saying, look, this action is destabilizing. It's dangerous. It takes us into uncharted territory. Could it not be the case that that is why people are now thinking, oh, this is dangerous, because somebody they trusted was saying this is dangerous, as opposed to the membership doing exactly what they should do to make sure the business was well regulated?
Yeah, again, it's feeding back comments that we received in
sure.
in the interviews. So yeah, that's
just wondered if it was art imitating life or the other way around. Anyway.
Okay, thanks, Simon. Andy.
Simon, I can't answer. I will come back on what you just said. That's not why I put my hand up. But I mean, I can't answer what the reason is. But we've got two government departments looking at alternatives to Nominet as a way of running the UK namespace. So certainly they're upset, and we need to understand that. I personally believe that they will not be upset once we, bring the company into a state where we are re-establish trust between the members and the company, and we have a forward direction which members can support. So I expect it to go away, but it exists, and that's all that will get picked up by research like this. Not why. Perfectly good question. Don't know why, but it certainly does exist. The what I wanted to say, look, when I read this through, I think, as Simon said, much of it reflects what the public benefit campaign have been saying. Much of it, therefore, is responded to, I think, by the thing I sent out to members. I think the thing that I'm continuing to work hard at and think hard about is transparency. And I'll put a blog out about that. I just didn't want you to think I'm not listening. We've been listening to this as we go through all the time. And I find it really easy to differentiate between what employees are saying, members are saying, and personally, and stakeholders saying, and not to mix the three things up. They're all inputs that are useful to a board in making their decisions, are important to a board in making decisions, but they're not the same thing. We don't add them up in any sort of way in our heads, just to be quite clear about that. And there's a useful piece of work. I think we've been feeding it in as been going along. As I say, I'm still pondering on transparency, and particularly when we have new member directors on board again after the AGM. If I'm in the chair, we'll spend longer talking about transparency and what the right way ahead is that. And the governance stuff, again, we will need to think about and come back to in terms of, are we right in saying that the current governance works well, or are there any things that need to be changed? There are members who think they should, and members who think they shouldn't, and other stakeholders who think they should and shouldn't. In the end, the board will have to consider whether there is anything that would have very strong member support. As I've said before, on governance, you only get governance change done if you get, depending on what it is, 75 or 90% of the people voting to vote for you. So you need to get something that's really popular, I think, before you can even consider taking that forward. So I found it useful. I think it's been really helpful to add to what we were hearing already and to think it through. And the board spent a lot of time listening to Savanta and thinking those things through. And it's already had an impact on the things that we have done so far. That's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Thanks, Andy. Okay, we have just over 15 minutes left of the allotted time, but we don't have to use it all if you don't have any more questions. Andrew.
So I just wondered what the government stakeholders actually want. Is it that they don't want any more instability with EGMs and members voting like that? Do they want some kind of top-down organisation that the board can't be touched, and so they're appointed by the board? Or is it the members' power reduced with voting rights clipped even more, or voting to go all together? What would satisfy those governance departments that you mentioned just a moment ago?
I certainly haven't heard any of the things you've mentioned there suggested. Oh, sorry.
Harry, I think that was a comment on the back of Andy's. I think
okay.
Andrew's point was on the back of
Yeah,
Andy.
I don't know, you can answer that. Look, I think, I don't think they have a view. They just, as I said to a number of people when they said, oh, congratulations, a minister has tweeted about your arrival as chairman. I said, I didn't think that's a good idea. I think we're a £50 million turnover company and ministers shouldn't have any interest in what we're doing at all, really. We should be being an efficient, quiet organisation, working away behind the scenes, delivering critical national infrastructure, and supporting registrants and registrars, and being, you know, a fairly straightforward organisation. So I don't know the answer to that, but I do believe that if we, as I said, that if we regain confidence in members and we work together effectively, then our stakeholders will be very happy.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else? Can we just have a reminder about next steps, Ellie? Sorry to spring you, but I don't want to say the wrong thing and promise members something that actually isn't going to happen very soon. So could you just confirm in terms of publication for final report and things like that, please?
Certainly, yeah. So the final Savanta report will be published hopefully later today, as well as all of the data tables that underline the report as well, or have fed into that report. It is all broken down by the different groups, so there's no sort of merging together of the different data sets. I know Andy is also, as he mentioned, providing a sort of a blog that sits alongside that. And we're also publishing a document that outlines the different stakeholders, so that the people that we consider to be stakeholders of Nominet and the UK registry and our cyber business.
Okay, thanks, Ellie. There you go. Lots of reading for you guys to do later on this afternoon if you have nothing else on your agenda. Okay, last shout for any more comments, questions, anything else anyone wants to say before we give you a whole 13 minutes back. No? Okay. Well, thank you very much for everybody for joining us today. And also thanks very much if you are one of the members who is actually taking the time to give us some feedback throughout this process that obviously has been going over, you know, a long period of time. We are really, really grateful. Even if you haven't done it through this particular survey, but you've given us feedback in a different way, then that's really great, and please do continue to do so. Like I said, carry on giving us feedback. We're the member engagement team is always here, so engagement@nominet.uk, and if it's not specific to us, but it's something that we can help with colleagues in the business, very happy to forward that on and help you with that kind of stuff. But thank you to Harry and Megan in particular for carrying out that work and presenting today. And thanks very much to the rest of the Nominet team also for joining us. So with that, we shall call it today and close the session, and hope to see you. Oh, quick reminders. Obviously, voting opens for non-executive director elections opens on the 27th. So please do look out for your email from CES, who are the independent election scrutineer, and that will go to the voting contact. So if you do have time, check that your contact details are up to date in your online services account. So that's voting, and then obviously you can register for the AGM already, and you should have received the information about that last week. If anybody has not received any information that they're expecting, again, the email address is engagement@nominet.uk, and we can help you out with that. That's all I want to say. I always like to have a little plug, something at the end. So hope to see you all soon, and please do take time to vote. Okay, thanks so much, guys. Bye for now.
Thanks, everyone.